He's got a fever. We need paramedics now. Sir, call 911.
I said that's not our problem.
In a small ice cream shop on the edge of downtown Chicago, a boy named Hugo Rivera scooped dreams for strangers. Day after day, behind the glass counter and neon smile, he served happiness he couldn't afford, sprinkles, fudge, laughter, all while his mother lay at home fighting cancer. He was only 20, but life had aged him early. Books sat dog-eared in his locker, reminders of the college he couldn't yet reach. Still, he believed that kindness meant something, until the day it nearly cost him everything. It was supposed to be an ordinary afternoon, the kind where the biggest worry was running out of waffle cones. But when the shop door burst open and a Hell's Angel biker stormed in carrying his fevered, unconscious son, the world tilted. Customers froze. The manager barked. And Hugo moved. He stepped forward when everyone else stepped back. He helped when everyone else judged. And for that, he was fired. But what he didn't know was that the man he helped wasn't just another desperate stranger. He was someone powerful, connected. And the act that got Hugo fired was about to change his entire life. Before we get into this, tell me, where are you watching this from? Comment your city below. Hit that subscribe button and like the video. Now let's rewind to how this moment started. The morning had started like every other, sugar dust coating the air, the bell above the door jingling every few minutes, and Hugo forcing his tired smile with every, "What flavor can I get you?" Behind him, the mixer hummed. Beside him, his manager, Mr. Phelps, hovered with that perpetual scowl that could sour even strawberry cheesecake. "Keep the counter clean, Hugo," he snapped, not looking up from his clipboard. "Presentation matters more than pity tips." "Yes, sir," Hugo said softly, wiping the same spotless counter again. He'd learned not to argue. He needed this job. Between rent, groceries, and his mother's chemo bills, Frosty's Creamery was the only thing standing between them and eviction. The clock ticked past 2 p.m. The lunch crowd slowed. A group of teenagers laughed near the window, phones out, filming each other with dripping cones. The shop smelled of vanilla and caramel, the kind of sweetness that made people forget the world was hard. But Hugo couldn't forget. Not with his phone buzzing every few hours with reminders from the hospital app. Medication due. Appointment tomorrow. Payment pending. He swallowed the lump in his throat and adjusted his hat. One more month, he told himself. If I can just make it one more month, maybe I'll have enough to cover Mom's next treatment. The bell jingled again. At first, no one looked up. But the sound that followed, boots heavy and fast, made the laughter fade. A tall man burst through the doorway, leather jacket creased, tattoos crawling up his neck like smoke. His arms shook as he clutched a small boy, maybe 6 years old, limp, pale, sweat glistening on his forehead. "Please," the man's voice cracked. "Somebody call an ambulance. He's burning up. Please." Every head turned. The customers froze, spoons halfway to their mouths. A woman gasped and pulled her daughter closer. The teenagers backed away, whispering. Mr. Phelps appeared from the back, frown deepening. "Sir," he said sharply, "you can't bring that in here." But Hugo was already moving. He ducked under the counter and hurried toward the biker. "Here, lay him down," he said quickly, clearing a small table near the door. He grabbed napkins, soaked them under the soda tap, and pressed them gently to the boy's forehead. The man Grant, though Hugo didn't know his name yet, looked terrified, sweat mixing with road dust. He stopped responding. Said his stomach hurt. Then he went out. Hugo glanced up. The boy's breathing was shallow. "He's got a fever, a bad one. We need paramedics now." He turned toward Phelps. "Sir, call 911. Phelps hesitated. His eyes darted from the tattooed biker to the customers clutching their purses. "We can't have this here," he hissed. "It's bad for business." "He's a child," Hugo shot back. "He needs help." "I said that's not our problem." The biker's face twisted with helpless rage. "Please," he whispered. "I just need a phone, anything." Hugo pulled his own phone from his apron and dialed. "I've got it," he said. "Stay with me, okay?" When the operator picked up, his voice trembled but steady. "Yes, 911, Frosty's Creamery on Lincoln Avenue. There's a child, maybe 6, unconscious, high fever, possible seizure. Please hurry." By the time the sirens wailed in the distance, the shop had turned into a cage of silence. No one spoke. No one moved. Only the hum of the freezers filled the space. The paramedics burst in moments later, checked vitals, lifted the boy gently onto the stretcher. Grant followed, eyes glistening. Before leaving, he turned to Hugo, gripping his shoulder. "Thank you," he said, voice raw. "You didn't have to." Hugo nodded, breath shaking. "You're welcome." And just like that, they were gone. The red lights faded. The door closed. Then, slowly, the whispers began again. Mr. Phelps emerged, arms crossed. "You done playing hero?" Hugo blinked. "Sir, you abandoned your post, used company resources, and scared half my customers away. We don't tolerate that here." He was dying. "Not my concern," Phelps snapped. "Clean out your locker." "You're fired." The words hit harder than Hugo expected. Fired. Just like that. No warning. No mercy. He stood there for a moment, the sound of the freezers buzzing behind him, the smell of melted vanilla lingering in the air. And for the first time, Hugo realized that kindness came with a cost, one he might not be able to afford. He took off his apron, folded it neatly, and placed it on the counter. "You're right," he said quietly. "You don't tolerate kindness here." And then he walked out, into the sunlight, into uncertainty, not knowing that the man he just helped would soon return, and that this act of compassion would open doors he never thought he'd walk through. The evening sun painted the cracked sidewalks of Chicago in gold and rust as Hugo Rivera walked home, his apron folded under his arm. His shoes scuffed the pavement with every tired step, but it wasn't exhaustion that slowed him down, it was the weight of what had just happened. He'd been fired before the clock even hit closing time. No warning. No thank you. Just a cold stare and the words, "You're done here." He tried to tell himself he didn't care, that was just a job, but every time he blinked, he saw the boy's pale face. The way his little hand twitched. The sound of that biker's voice cracking with fear. How could anyone look at that and still walk away? He passed a line of shops closing for the night, a florist sweeping petals from the curb, a diner cook dragging down the steel shutter. The air smelled faintly of rain and fried food. City noise faded into a dull hum. By the time he reached the worn brick building he called home, the streetlights had blinked to life. Apartment 3B was small, one bedroom, peeling paint, a humming refrigerator that served as background music to every meal. Inside, his mother lay on the couch under a thin blanket, her head wrapped in a soft scarf, a half-read Bible resting on her lap. "Hugo," she said softly, her voice weak but warm. "You're home early." He forced a smile and set his bag on the floor. "Yeah, slow day." Her eyes, still sharp despite the illness, narrowed. "Slow day or bad day?" He hesitated, then sank into the chair beside her. "You ever do the right thing and get punished for it?" She chuckled, a dry, tired sound. "That's half of life, baby." He stared at his hands. The smell of vanilla still clung to his shirt. There was a man. He came in with his little boy. The kid was burning up. Nobody wanted to help. So I did. I called 911. "That's good," she said gently. "So what's the bad part?" "I got fired." Her hand froze on the blanket. "For helping a sick child?" He nodded. "Phelps said I scared customers. Said it wasn't my business." She closed her eyes for a long moment, then opened them with a faint smile. "You did the right thing, Hugo. Doesn't feel like it. It will." She reached out, fingers trembling slightly, and rested her hand over his. "Sometimes kindness costs you before it blesses you. That's the world we live in. But one day, it'll come back to you." He wanted to believe her. He really did. But the truth was uglier. Rent was due in 5 days. Her next chemo session was next week. And now his paycheck was gone. He looked around the apartment, the small bookshelf stacked with her old nursing manuals, the medicine bottles lined neatly on the counter, the crumpled hospital bills clipped with hope. "I'll find another job," he said finally. "Anything. Maybe the diner down the block needs help." She gave him that look, the one that said she saw through him completely. "Promise me you'll rest tonight first." "Rest doesn't pay bills, Mom." "Neither does worry." He smiled faintly. "Yes, ma'am." He made her a cup of tea before bed, chamomile with extra honey, the way she liked it, then sat by the window long after she'd fallen asleep. The city outside pulsed with distant sirens and headlights. Somewhere out there, that biker and his son were probably in a hospital room. He hoped the boy was okay. He hoped the man made it in time. When he finally lay down, sleep came slow. Every time his eyes closed, he replayed it. The looks of disgust from the customers, the fear, the silence. Not one person had stepped forward but him. And yet he was the one punished. Morning came with gray skies and the faint smell of coffee drifting through the hallway. Hugo woke early, got dressed quietly, and slipped out to the corner store. He bought milk and a single loaf of bread, the cheapest brand. Every coin mattered now. As he walked back, his phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number. You helped me yesterday. This is Grant. My son's stable. Thank you. Hugo stopped mid-step, heart kicking against his ribs. Grant, the biker. Before he could reply, another message came through. If you're home, I'd like to stop by. Won't take long. He hesitated. Maybe it was guilt talking. Maybe the man just wanted to say thanks. Either way, curiosity won. Sure, Hugo typed. 3B, top floor. He slipped the phone back into his pocket, nerves buzzing. He didn't tell his mom. She needed peace, not more surprises. Half an hour later, a low rumble echoed outside. Hugo peered out the window and froze. A black SUV, polished, heavy, rolled up to the curb. The driver's door opened, and out stepped Grant, the same man from yesterday, only this time he wasn't wearing his biker jacket. He looked different. A clean shirt, neatly tied hair, but the tattoos still peeked from his collar, reminders of a past that clung to him like shadow. Hugo opened the door before he could knock. Sir, how's your son? Grant exhaled, voice thick with relief. Better. They said another hour and it could have gone bad. You saved him, kid. Hugo shook his head quickly. No, I just called for help. You acted when no one else did, Grant said. That's what matters. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope. For you. Grant reached into his jacket and pulled out a plain white envelope. For you, he said. Hugo frowned. I can't take your money. It's not money, Grant replied. It's gratitude. He pressed the envelope into Hugo's hands, but this time he didn't turn to leave right away. He hesitated, almost like he wanted Hugo to understand something deeper. After the hospital, Grant said quietly, I went back to that ice cream shop. The manager said you got fired. I asked around. One of the girls told me you've been saving every paycheck for your mom's treatments and that you were hoping to go back to school someday. Hugo blinked, stunned. You asked about me? Grant nodded once. When someone does what you did, you don't just walk away and forget it. He stepped back, his boots echoing against the floor. Open it when I'm gone. Then he walked down the hallway and out the door. Hugo looked down at the envelope. No name, no logo, just his name written in careful block letters. Inside, his fingers brushed against something thick, folded paper, official looking, stamped and sealed. He unfolded it slowly, his eyes scanning the words. Then his breath caught. Lakeside Community College, full tuition scholarship. And beneath it, a note written in a rough, steady hand. For the boy who showed more heart than the world deserves. G.W. Hugo stood frozen, tears stinging his eyes. For the first time in years, the weight on his shoulders felt lighter. He didn't know how or why. He didn't even know who Grant really was. But one thing was clear, his act of kindness hadn't ended in that shop. It was only the beginning. The next morning, sunlight crept through thin curtains, painting pale stripes across Hugo's small apartment. He hadn't slept much. The envelope still sat on the kitchen table, open. Its contents spread like a miracle. He was afraid to touch too much. A scholarship letter, a check, and a handwritten note signed simply GW. He'd read it 5 times. Still didn't feel real. His mother stirred on the couch, her scarf slightly crooked. She smiled faintly when she saw him staring at the letter again. You're still looking at it, she teased softly. Just making sure it doesn't vanish, he said. She reached for his hand. It's real, Hugo. So is your kindness. Maybe it finally came back around. He smiled weakly. Feels like someone else's life. Not mine. Maybe it's the life you were meant to have, she whispered. He nodded, but part of him couldn't let go of what happened. The humiliation. The laughter from the other workers. The way Mr. Phelps looked at him like he was dirt. He needed closure, even if it was just to breathe again. I'm heading out for a bit, he told her. To where? He hesitated. The shop. Her brows furrowed. Hugo, I just need to see it. One last time. The city buzzed with its usual rhythm. Cars honking, pigeons scattering, the distant hum of the L train overhead. When Hugo reached Frosty's creamery, the windows gleamed as if someone had scrubbed them for an inspection. The sign that once flickered Frosty's now glowed bright and even. Inside, the air felt different, still smelled of sugar and cream, but the noise was gone. No music. No laughter. Just a quiet tension. As Hugo pushed open the door, heads turned. A few workers, the same ones who'd avoided his eyes yesterday, froze mid-task. One girl at the register whispered something to another. And then he saw him. Mr. Phelps. The manager stood near the counter, clipboard in hand, but his face was pale. Sweat glistened at his temple. A tall man in a gray suit stood beside him, speaking in low, firm tones. Mr. Phelps, the suited man said, corporate reviewed yesterday's report. Your conduct violated company policy and anti-discrimination standards. Effective immediately, your employment is terminated. What? Phelps stammered. You can't be serious. I've run this shop for 12 years. The man handed him a paper. And you turned it into a liability in one day. Pack your things. The air went still. Even the freezers seemed to hum quieter. Phelps turned, and his eyes locked on Hugo. You, he hissed, voice trembling with fury. You think you won something, huh? You embarrassed me. The corporate man cut in sharply. Mr. Rivera is not your concern anymore, Mr. Phelps. In fact, you should thank him. If he hadn't shown compassion when you refused, we might have faced a far worse headline. Hugo blinked, trying to process. Headline? The man turned toward him, expression softening slightly. Mr. Rivera, the incident yesterday reached corporate. One of the customers filmed the whole thing, you helping the child, the manager yelling, everything. It's all over social media this morning. Over 100,000 views. Hugo's jaw dropped. You're kidding. Not at all. And the story caught attention, including someone named Grant Walker. The name hit Hugo like a spark. Grant. The man smiled faintly. Yes. He called our headquarters early this morning. Turns out he owns this building and several others in the Frosty's chain. He's one of our silent partners. For a moment, Hugo couldn't breathe. The words felt unreal. The biker who'd stumbled into his shop was one of the company's owners? The corporate man continued. Mr. Walker requested that we review your case immediately. After seeing the footage, upper management agreed your termination was unjust. You're being reinstated with a raise and benefits if you'd like to return. Hugo stood frozen. The words bounced around in his head, disbelieving. You mean, he? Yes, the man said simply. He made a few phone calls. Things move quickly when someone like Grant Walker cares enough to make them. At that moment, the shop door opened again, and a familiar voice filled the silence. Looks like I came just in time. Grant walked in, no leather jacket this time, just a simple dark shirt, sleeves rolled to his elbows. His presence still carried that quiet authority, the kind that didn't need volume to command a room. Every employee turned to look. Even Phelps froze, clipboard clutched like a shield. Grant's gaze swept across the shop before landing on Hugo. You, he said, his tone softer. Glad you came back. Hugo swallowed. I didn't know you. Owned a few of these. Grant finished for him with a faint smirk. Yeah, I try not to lead with that. Makes people act fake. He turned toward the corporate man. We good here? Yes, Mr. Walker. Everything's in order. Grant nodded. Good. Then I'll take it from here. The man left quietly, and for a moment, only the soft hum of the freezers filled the air again. Grant stepped closer to Hugo. You didn't just help my son. You reminded me what this company was supposed to stand for. When my brother and I started it years ago, it was about people, not policies. Somewhere along the way, that got lost. Hugo's eyes widened. Wait, you started Frosty's? Grant chuckled softly. Yeah, the biker turned businessman. I know, doesn't quite fit the image. He glanced toward Phelps, whose face was now a storm of disbelief and regret. You fired a kid who did the right thing. I can't have people like that running my stores. Phelps tried to speak, but Grant raised a hand. Save it. The cameras caught everything. You humiliated a young man who showed more integrity than this entire shop combined. Now you can go find somewhere else that rewards cruelty." The manager's jaw clenched, but he said nothing. He set his clipboard down and stormed out, muttering under his breath. The door swung shut behind him with a dull thud. Grant turned back to Hugo. "So, what do you say, kid? You want your job back?" Hugo hesitated. I don't know. I'm grateful, but I don't want pity." Grant smiled, eyes warm but steady. "This isn't pity. It's recognition. You've got the kind of heart people can't train. That's worth more than any resume." He reached into his jacket again and handed Hugo a small card. "Come by the main office tomorrow. There's a position open, assistant manager training program. Full salary, benefits, tuition assistance if you still plan to study. I'll vouch for you personally." Hugo's throat tightened. "Why me?" Grant's gaze softened. "Because I've met a lot of people with money, power, and pride, but not many who do the right thing when it costs them. You did. And that's the kind of person I want around." Hugo took the card, his hand trembling. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Grant clapped a firm hand on his shoulder. "Say yes. Then go take care of your mom. I'll see you tomorrow." He turned toward the door, but before leaving, he added quietly, "By the way, the kid's doing fine. Tiffany's already asking for ice cream." Hugo laughed through the lump in his throat. "Tell him the first one's on me." Grant smiled, nodded once, and stepped out into the sunlight. The door closed behind him, and for the first time since that awful day, Hugo breathed deeply, the scent of sugar and vanilla filling his chest like hope. He wasn't just getting his job back. He was getting his life back. The next few days felt like a dream Hugo was scared to wake up from. Every morning, he double-checked the scholarship letter and Grant's business card, just to make sure they were still real, that he hadn't imagined the twist his life had taken. He had gone from unemployed and hopeless to sitting in the Frosty's corporate office, signing a new contract. Assistant manager training program. Tuition covered. Health insurance included. It didn't feel like a reward. It felt like grace, undeserved, overwhelming, and humbling all at once. When he returned home that evening, his mother was sitting up for the first time in weeks, a soft scarf wrapped neatly around her head, her smile bright enough to rival the city lights. "Hugo," she whispered as he entered, "you look different." He grinned. "Do what?" "There's something in your eyes," she said softly. "Peace." "It's been a long time since I saw that." He sat beside her on the couch, unable to hold back the tears that welled up. "I thought I'd lost everything, Mom. I thought kindness didn't count anymore. But I was wrong." He handed her the folder from the company. She opened it slowly, her fingers trembling. When her eyes reached the words health coverage, she gasped. "Hugo, oh my God." Her hand flew to her mouth. This is real?" He nodded. "Grant, the biker from the shop, turns out he's one of the owners. He found out I got fired, and he made everything right." Her eyes glistened. "And he's the one you helped?" "Yeah," Hugo whispered. "His little boy's name is Tiffany. He's doing better now." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The city hummed outside the window, buses, sirens, the heartbeat of life moving forward. Then she said quietly, "You see? I told you, kindness always costs before it blesses." Hugo laughed through the tears. "You're always right." She smiled faintly. "Not always. But this time I prayed for it." A week later, Hugo visited the hospital where Tiffany was recovering. The boy was small, pale, but smiling, sitting up in bed with a coloring book in his lap. Grant sat beside him, looking more like a father than a biker now. Softer eyes, calmer hands. When Tiffany saw Hugo, he grinned weakly. "Hey, you're the ice cream man." Hugo chuckled. "That's me." Grant stood, clasping Hugo's shoulder. "He's been asking for you since he woke up." Tiffany nodded seriously. "You make good ice cream." Hugo smiled, his heart melting a little. "Next time you're out of here, we'll make one together, deal?" "Deal," the boy said, holding out his tiny pinky. Hugo linked his with a quiet laugh. Grant watched them, his jaw tightening just a little, not in anger, but in emotion he couldn't hide. "You remind me of me when I was young," he said. "Except you've got more courage than I ever did." Hugo shook his head. "I was just doing what anyone should have done." Grant gave a faint smile. "Maybe, but not everyone does." They stood there for a moment, two men from completely different worlds, connected by one simple act of compassion. Before leaving, Grant handed him another envelope. "No surprises this time," he said. "Just something small for your mom. Tell her it's from Tiffany." Inside later that night, Hugo found a prepaid card for her medication and a handwritten note in messy block letters. "Tell your mom she raised a good man." Hugo sat by her bedside reading it aloud, and she smiled, tears glimmering in her tired eyes. "I think God just sent us an angel," she said softly. He looked at the note again, the ink smudged where Grant's thumb must have pressed. "Maybe," Hugo said quietly, "just one with tattoos." That night, as his mother slept, Hugo stood by the window, watching the city lights flicker like stars scattered too close to Earth. For the first time in years, the weight on his chest wasn't fear. It was gratitude. He had learned something simple, something his mother had always known but he had just now understood. Sometimes, when you choose to do the right thing, the world doesn't clap. It punishes you first. But kindness has a way of finding its way home, even if it takes the long road. And for the first time, Hugo believed it. The Frosties' corporate building stood tall and bright against the Chicago skyline, a glass giant reflecting clouds and ambition. When Hugo first stepped through its revolving doors, the smell of fresh coffee and carpet polish nearly made him dizzy. Everything here gleamed, the floors, the smiles, even the lies. He clutched his new ID badge, Hugo Rivera, assistant manager trainee, and exhaled slowly. He wasn't sure which felt heavier, the weight of expectation or the disbelief that he was even here at all. Grant had arranged everything. And as much as Hugo was grateful, he also feared one thing deeply, that people would think he hadn't earned this. He followed the HR rep through bright hallways lined with motivational posters, integrity, service, heart. He almost laughed at the irony. When they reached the training floor, a handful of young employees sat around glossy tables, tapping away at laptops. One of them, a tall guy with slicked back hair and a smirk that didn't quite reach his eyes, looked up. "You're the ice cream boy, right?" he said loud enough for the whole room to hear. Hugo froze. The others turned, curious. Someone whispered, "The one from that video?" The HR rep gave a tight smile. "This is Hugo Rivera. He'll be joining our management program." The slick-haired one said, leaning back. "Right? The hero." The word dripped sarcasm. Hugo forced a polite smile. "Just doing what anyone would have done." "Sure," the guy said, folding his arms. "And now you've got a golden ticket because of it. Must be nice." The HR rep cleared her throat sharply. "Let's all stay professional, please." But Hugo felt the sting. He wasn't naive. He knew how people talked. To them, he wasn't a trainee. He was a charity case. A headline. A lucky story Grant had dragged in to polish the company's image. He sat down quietly, ignoring the whispers. Focus, he told himself. Just learn. Work hard. The rest will follow. By lunch break, Hugo had already memorized the training manual, half the floor layout, and the safety code policy. But no amount of studying could silence the subtle tension that trailed him everywhere he went. When he entered the break room, conversations dipped. Laughter faded. Even the vending machines seemed to hum louder than the people. He poured coffee, trying to ignore the stares. Then he heard it, a voice near the corner. "Yeah, that's him. The one the boss handpicked. Fired one day, promoted the next. Must be nice knowing people." Hugo turned, his chest tightening. He didn't say anything, didn't need to. The smirk on their faces said enough. But before he could leave, a voice broke through the tension. Or maybe someone said evenly, "He earned it." Hugo turned. A woman, mid-20s, curly hair pulled into a bun, stood near the counter stirring her tea. She looked up at the others, unflinching. "None of you were there. You didn't see that video?" The kid risked his job for someone else's child. That's more courage than most of us show behind a desk. The room went silent. The woman turned to Hugo and smiled faintly. "I'm Leah. Welcome aboard." He smiled back, relief flooding through him. "Thanks." When she left, the whispers stopped. Hugo sipped his coffee quietly, the bitterness sharp but comforting. Maybe not everyone here was blind. That afternoon, Grant showed up unexpectedly. The room buzzed the moment he entered. The CEO with tattoos and a biker swagger didn't exactly blend in among polished suits. "Afternoon," he said, scanning the room until his gaze landed on Hugo. "How's day 1? "Educational," Hugo said with a small grin. Grant chuckled. "That's a polite word. They giving you a hard time? Nothing I can't handle." "Good," Grant said, voice low but proud. "Remember, you belong here. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." The trainees pretended not to listen, but every eye was on them. When Grant left, whispers rippled through the air again, but this time softer, respectful. Hugo sat back at his desk, a quiet smile tugging at his lips. For the first time since stepping through those glass doors, he didn't feel like an outsider. He felt like someone who had earned his place, not because of what he'd been given, but because of what he'd done when it mattered. That night, as he walked home under a dusky sky, his phone buzzed. A message from Leah? "Ignore them. They'll catch up eventually. You did the right thing." Hugo smiled. For once, it wasn't the world telling him he was too small, too poor, or too soft. It was life, quietly whispering, "Keep going." He looked up at the city lights, the hum of traffic fading behind him, and thought of his mother's words again. Kindness costs before it blesses. He hadn't understood it before. Now, every step forward was proof that she was right. The first week of classes at Lakeside Community College felt like stepping into another world. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Hallways buzzed with laughter, conversation, and the easy confidence of students who belonged there. Hugo stood just inside the door of his first night class, Principles of Management, clutching a borrowed notebook and a pen that barely wrote. He hadn't been in a classroom since high school. His palms were slick, his heart hammering. The professor, a gray-haired woman with kind eyes, noticed him hovering near the door. "You must be Mr. Rivera," she said, smiling. "Take any seat you like. Welcome back to school." The word back stung and soothed at the same time. Back. It meant he had returned to something he thought he'd lost forever. Days blurred into a rhythm that barely let him breathe. Morning, Frosty's corporate training. Evening, college classes. Night, caring for his mother and preparing her medication. He'd leave the apartment before sunrise and return after midnight, every bone aching, but his mind alive. He took notes on the train, studied during lunch breaks, and memorized definitions while waiting in hospital corridors. Sometimes exhaustion felt like a fog pressing against his skull. But whenever he wanted to quit, he'd think of two faces, his mother's and Grant's, one that prayed for him and one that believed in him. One Friday, after a particularly grueling day at work, Hugo dragged himself into class, his uniform still under his jacket. He sat at the back, blinking to stay awake. Today, the professor said, writing on the board, "We're discussing leadership under pressure. What does it mean to make the right choice when the wrong one is easier?" Hugo's eyes lifted slowly from his notebook. The words struck like lightning. He thought of that day, the boy on the counter, the panic, the silence, the moment he chose to act. Without raising his hand, he spoke up quietly, surprising even himself. "It means doing the right thing even when it costs you," he said. The professor turned, intrigued. "And why is that?" "Because if you wait for someone else to lead, you'll be waiting forever." The room went silent for a moment. Then the professor smiled. "Well said, Mr. Rivera." For the first time, Hugo didn't feel like an outsider in that classroom. He felt like he belonged. Back at home, his mother was sitting up with her knitting needles, though her hands shook slightly. "You look tired," she said softly as he entered. "School and work," he muttered, dropping his bag. "I think my brain's melting." She chuckled weakly. "That's how you know it's working." He sat beside her, rubbing his temples. "It's hard, Mom. Everyone there looks like they've had it figured out since birth. I feel like I'm 2 steps behind." She set her knitting down. "Hugo, you've been running uphill your whole life. You're not behind, you're stronger because of it." He looked at her, her thin face glowing softly under the lamp. "I just don't want to fail." She reached over, taking his hand. "You won't. You're building something real now, not just for you, but for both of us." Her voice trembled at the end, and for the first time in weeks, Hugo saw her fight back tears. It hit him how much she'd sacrificed quietly while he worked, how every step forward was also hers. He squeezed her hand gently. "Then I'll make it count." At work the next day, Leah noticed the dark circles under his eyes. "You studying all night again?" she asked, handing him a stack of reports. "Trying to," he said with a tired grin. "Midterms are coming up." She smirked. You know, for a guy who got famous for helping people, you're pretty bad at asking for help yourself. He chuckled. You offering? Maybe, she said, crossing her arms. I'm good with management theory. You bring the coffee, I'll bring the flashcards. That small exchange lit something inside Hugo. The warmth of friendship, the reminder that even the strongest people need someone to lean on. They studied after work a few nights a week, sitting in a corner booth of a nearby cafe. Sometimes they talked about school, sometimes about life, sometimes about nothing at all. Leah learned about his mom. Hugo learned that she'd been the first in her family to go to college too. Feels like the world gives second chances to everyone but the people who actually need them, she said one night. Yeah, Hugo murmured, but maybe that's why we fight harder when we finally get one. By the end of the month, Hugo's grades were among the top in his class. Grant called him into his office one afternoon. Heard you're pulling double duty, work and school, Grant said, leaning back in his chair. Yes, sir. Grant smiled faintly. Don't call me sir. Makes me feel old. He paused. Proud of you, kid. You're proving everyone wrong. Even the ones who didn't think you'd last a week here. Hugo grinned. Thanks. I just want to make it worth what you did for me. Grant shook his head. You already have. Just promise me one thing. When it's your turn to lift someone else, don't think twice. That night, as Hugo rode the train home, city lights streaking past the window, he opened his notebook. At the top of a blank page, he wrote, Do the right thing, even when it costs you. He underlined it twice. It wasn't just advice anymore. It was the story of his life and the beginning of the man he was becoming. 2 months into the assistant manager program, Hugo began to notice something about Frosty's corporate world. It wasn't just about ice cream. It was about people. And people, he was learning, could melt or harden depending on how you treated them. The training floor was full of ambition, clipped voices, fast footsteps, and smiles that rarely reached the eyes. But one thing hadn't changed since his first day. The way some of them still looked at him as if he'd been placed there, not earned it. Even so, Hugo kept his head down, studying harder than anyone else. He showed up early, stayed late, and never let the whispers shake his focus. It was a Thursday morning when the real test came. A system glitch shut down Frosty's online ordering network across several stores. Phones rang non-stop, orders vanished mid-transaction, and the district manager, a stiff, sharp man named Carlisle, barked orders over the intercom like it was a war zone. Where's the status update? He snapped, pacing the floor. No one answered. Panic rippled through the office. Hugo stood quietly near the back, watching the chaos. He'd been reading about crisis management the night before in one of his college modules. The words echoed in his mind. Leadership isn't loud. It's clear. He took a slow breath, walked up to the main desk, and started organizing the noise. Let's split the workload, he said calmly. Each person takes 2 stores. Call them directly. Confirm manual orders while we wait for IT to reboot the system. Carlisle glared at him. And who exactly told you to take charge, Rivera? Hugo met his eyes. No one, sir. But someone has to. For a moment, silence. Then, almost reluctantly, Carlisle gave a curt nod. Fine. Make it fast. For the next 2 hours, Hugo coordinated like a conductor, answering calls, delegating tasks, jotting updates on the whiteboard, keeping everyone calm. Leah worked beside him, quick and steady, feeding him information. The panic began to settle. By the time IT restored the system, every store had been accounted for, and not one order was lost. When Carlisle finally spoke again, his voice was quieter. Good work, everyone. Then, after a beat, especially you, Rivera. Hugo nodded respectfully. Just doing my job. But when he turned, he caught Leah's proud smile, and behind her, a few other trainees nodding in subtle respect. For the first time, the whispers weren't mocking. They were impressed. That afternoon, Grant walked into the office like he always did, unannounced and effortlessly commanding. Carlisle filled me in, he said, motioning Hugo into his glass-walled office. Said you saved us from losing 3 major accounts. Hugo shrugged. Just teamwork. Grant smirked. Yeah, but someone has to start the team. That takes guts. He leaned back, studying him. How's school? Good. Hard. But good, Hugo said. I'm learning things I actually get to use. Grant nodded slowly. You're doing what most people don't, applying knowledge instead of collecting it. There was a pause. Grant's tone softened. When I was your age, I dropped out. Thought I'd never make it out of the mess I was in. You're rewriting that story, not just for yourself, but for kids like you who'll come after. Hugo didn't know what to say. His throat tightened. I'm just trying not to waste what you gave me. Grant smiled faintly. You didn't waste it. You multiplied it. Later that evening, when the office had emptied out, Hugo sat alone at his desk finishing his reports. Leah passed by on her way out and paused. You handled today like a pro. He chuckled. I was terrified. That's what makes it real, she said. Leadership isn't about being fearless. It's about staying steady while everyone else falls apart. He looked at her, smiling. You sound like my professor. Maybe your professor is just as tired as I am, she laughed. Before she left, she turned back. Seriously, Hugo, today changed how people see you. You're not just the guy from that video anymore. He didn't reply right away. He just nodded, the words sinking in slowly, like sunlight on frozen ground. When he got home that night, his mother was waiting up with tea. I heard from Mrs. Valdez at church, she said, a little grin tugging her lips. She saw you on the Frosties website. Hugo blinked. What? They wrote an article about young leaders in the company. You're one of them. He sat down, speechless. Her voice grew soft. I told you, Hugo. Kindness costs before it blesses. But when it blesses, it does it beautifully. He took her hand, feeling the warmth of her thin fingers. I'm starting to believe that, he said quietly. As she drifted off to sleep, Hugo opened his laptop and stared at the photo on Frosty's homepage. His own tired smile frozen mid-laugh, captioned leadership under pressure. He never wanted fame. He only wanted to matter. And now somehow he did. It started with a whisper. Not the kind that came from gossip, but the kind that carried weight, the kind people lowered their voices for. Hugo was reviewing reports late one afternoon when Leah rushed in, her face pale. You need to see this, she said quietly, sliding a folder onto his desk. Inside were internal memos, expense reports, digital receipts, and one note marked confidential. Do not share outside corporate. Hugo frowned. What is this? Product testing results, Leah whispered. They show contamination in one of Frosty's new milk suppliers, the one being rolled out to the Midwest stores. He blinked, flipping through the pages. The numbers were clear. The samples were bad. Yet the final report, the one sent to the FDA, had been edited. The warning section was gone. Who changed it? Hugo asked, his voice low. Carlisle, she said. And I think Grant doesn't know yet. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The hum of the air conditioner filled the silence. If this leaked, the company could lose millions. If it didn't, families, kids, could get sick. Hugo's stomach twisted. He thought about the little boy he'd saved months ago, about how fragile one life could be. The next morning, Carlisle called a mandatory meeting. Listen up, he barked. There's been a little noise about the supplier reports. I want everyone to keep their mouths shut until the corporate finishes its internal review. You talk, you're done here. His eyes flicked to Hugo as he said it. The message was clear. After the meeting, Leah caught up with him in the hallway. What are you going to do? She whispered. He stared straight ahead. I don't know. But I can't just sit on this. Then be careful, she said. You know how this place works. He did. He'd seen how fast a hero could turn into a headline, and how quickly a system could bury the truth under paperwork and silence. That night, Hugo stayed late at the office. Everyone had gone home, the halls dark except for the glow of his computer screen. He stared at the email draft open before him, addressed to Grant Walker. Subject: Urgent Safety Report Concerns. His finger hovered over the send button. One click, and everything could explode. He thought of Grant, the man who'd lifted him out of poverty, given him a chance, believed in him. Exposing this could hurt him, maybe even destroy the brand he'd built. But hiding it, that wasn't who Hugo was anymore. He closed his eyes. His mother's words echoed in his mind. Kindness costs before it blesses. He clicked send. The next morning, everything changed. By 8 a.m., Grant was at the office. His face was unreadable, calm, but tight around the jaw. Hugo, he said, motioning him into his office. Close the door. Hugo's heart pounded as he stepped inside. Leah stood by the window, arms folded, clearly summoned too. Grant held up a printout. You sent this? Yes, sir. Grant's voice was quiet. You realize what this means? Yes, Hugo said. But people could get sick. You always said Frosties stood for people before profit. For a long moment, Grant just stared at him. Then, to Hugo's shock, he sat back and let out a slow, weary laugh. You remind me of me 20 years ago. Hugo blinked. You're not angry. Grant shook his head. No. Disappointed in myself. He tossed the papers onto the desk. I built this place to mean something. But somewhere along the line, I hired people who care more about numbers than lives. He looked up at Hugo, eyes fierce now. You did the right thing. I needed someone brave enough to tell me the truth, even if it meant losing everything. Hugo swallowed. So, what happens now? Grant leaned forward. Now we fix it. Together. By noon, Carlisle was gone. Grant personally called every regional manager, ordered an immediate recall of the contaminated batch, and held a press conference that evening. He stood in front of cameras and didn't flinch. We discovered a supplier issue, he said. It's being handled. Because at Frosties, safety matters more than profit. And I want to thank one of our own, Hugo Rivera, for bringing this to my attention. Reporters buzzed. Flashbulbs popped. Hugo stood at the back of the room, heart pounding. Leah squeezed his hand. Grant finished with quiet conviction. When people like him lead with honesty, it reminds us why we started this company in the first place. That night, after the press conference, Grant found Hugo outside near the parking lot. You know, you could have stayed quiet, he said. No one would have known. I would have known, Hugo replied softly. Grant smiled. That's exactly why I trust you. He placed a hand on Hugo's shoulder. From now on, you're not just a trainee. You're part of the leadership team. You earned that the hard way. Hugo felt his throat tighten. Thank you. Don't thank me, Grant said. Thank your conscience. It's louder than fear, and that's rare. As Hugo drove home that night, the city lights blurred through the windshield. He felt tired, but alive, like he'd just survived another storm and come out stronger. He didn't have everything figured out, but he had something better, the peace that comes from knowing he'd done right again, even when it could have cost him everything. And in his world, that was more valuable than any promotion. The auditorium was packed, hundreds of students in navy gowns, golden tassels swaying as the graduation march filled the air. Hugo sat in the third row, cap tilted slightly, palms sweating against the edge of his seat. His name, Hugo Rivera, was printed neatly on the program, under Associate of Business Administration honors. For a moment, he just stared at it, unable to believe it was real. He wasn't supposed to be here. A year ago, he was scooping ice cream and fighting exhaustion. Now he was walking across a stage built on second chances. His mother sat in the front row, wrapped in a soft blue shawl. Her face looked tired, but her smile was radiant, alive in a way it hadn't been in months. The chemo had worked. The cancer was in remission. Leah sat beside her, camera in hand, waving when Hugo glanced her way. And a few seats down, quietly dressed in a charcoal suit that somehow still made him look like a rebel, sat Grant Walker. He gave Hugo a nod, the kind that said, "I'm proud of you, kid." When his name was called, Hugo walked to the stage, his heart hammering. The crowd blurred. The lights felt warm on his face. The dean handed him his diploma and shook his hand. "Congratulations, Mr. Rivera," she said. "You've earned this." He smiled, a small, trembling smile that carried 1,000 sleepless nights and silent prayers. Applause filled the room. His mother cried openly. Leah clapped so hard she nearly dropped her camera. And Grant, he just stood, hands in pockets, eyes shining with quiet pride. After the ceremony, they gathered outside under a gray Chicago sky that smelled faintly of rain and new beginnings. "You did it," Leah shouted, throwing her arms around him. "I told you you'd make it." He laughed, hugging her back. "I still can't believe it." "Believe it," she said. "You earned every bit of it." His mother joined them, holding his diploma like it was treasure. "I told you, Hugo, kindness always comes back." Then Grant walked up. "She's right," he said, smiling. "It does." Hugo turned, emotion thick in his throat. "Grant, I don't even know how to thank you." "Don't," Grant said. "You did what I couldn't at your age. You stayed true to who you are. You taught this company what it means to have a heart again." He paused, reaching into his jacket and pulling out a small white envelope, much like the one that changed Hugo's life months ago. Hugo blinked. "Not again," he said, half laughing. Grant chuckled. "Relax. No surprises this time. Just something small from the Frosties board. They want you to head the community outreach program. We're funding scholarships for kids who can't afford school. You'll be leading it." Hugo froze, staring at him. "Me? Who better?" Grant said. "You are the story we're trying to tell." Leah gasped softly. "Hugo, that's incredible." His mother pressed a hand to her heart, eyes glistening. "Do you see, Mijo? You gave hope, and hope came home." Weeks later, Hugo stood at the ribbon-cutting ceremony for the new Frosties Future Scholars program. Reporters lined the front row, snapping photos as he spoke at the podium. He cleared his throat, his voice steady but full of emotion. "I started this journey behind an ice cream counter," he began. "I didn't have much, just a mother who believed in me, and a heart that refused to stop trying. There was a time I thought kindness was weakness, that doing the right thing only made you lose faster. But I learned something." He paused, his eyes finding Grant's in the crowd. "When you choose compassion, when you lead with integrity, you might lose your job, your comfort, your safety, but you gain your soul. And sometimes, if you're lucky, the world finds a way to give it all back, just in a different form." Applause erupted. Cameras flashed. But Hugo didn't hear it all. He just looked at his mother in the front row, healthy, smiling, and whispered a quiet prayer of thanks. Later that night, after everyone had gone home, he visited the old Frosty shop where it all began. It was quieter now. Same bell above the door, same faint hum of the freezers. He stood by the counter where he'd once knelt beside a fevered child and smiled. The memory felt like another lifetime. A scared boy who'd chosen to help when everyone else froze. He hadn't known that moment would change everything. He closed his eyes and whispered softly, "Thank you." Not to anyone in particular, just to life, to grace, to the strange symmetry of it all. When he stepped back outside, Grant was waiting by his motorcycle, helmet under one arm. "Couldn't resist a nostalgia trip?" Grant said with a grin. "Just needed to see it," Hugo said. "It all started here." Grant nodded slowly. Funny thing about beginnings, they never really end. They just change shape. Hugo smiled. "What happens now?" Grant looked up at the fading sky. "Now you teach someone else what you learned the hard way." He handed him a second helmet. "Come on, kid. Let's go celebrate." Hugo hesitated, then grinned, slipping it on. "You're sure about this?" Grant laughed. "You saved my son. You fixed my company. You earned the ride." As the bike roared to life, Hugo held on, the wind whipping past his face, the city lights blurring into a trail of gold and blue. For the first time in his life, he wasn't running toward survival, he was riding toward purpose. And somewhere between the hum of the engine and the rush of air, he realized, kindness hadn't just changed his story. It had rewritten his destiny. So if this story moved something in you, subscribe and like this video so the algorithm knows compassion still matters. That no matter how dark the road gets, there's always a porch light somewhere, burning for you to find your way home. Now go on, also check out the 2 videos on the screen right now.